So, new League of Legends champion, huh? Well, let's see here. What's the lore on this character? Right, okay. Samira and her twin brother, Virgil, were born to the legendary demon Sparta and the human, Eva. As young children, Sparta would train the twins, and for much of Samira's early childhood, she didn't realize her father was a No, wait, hang on. Oh, no, I've got the wrong paper here. Just a sec. There we go. Born from a union between a Lumen sage and an Umbra witch, Samira was the forbidden child that caused a rift between the witches and sages. At a moment of crisis, her best friend Sean seals her away to sleep for 500 years. Hello, mercenaries and mischief makers. My name is TBSky, and I poke fun, but Riot themselves have been pretty clear about where they were taking their inspiration when they came up with Samira. From her style meter to her guns and swords to her cocky attitude, Samira directly lifts a lot of her concept from spectacle fighters like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta. And these things combined with her melee/ranged mechanics make her a fairly unique champion in League of Legends. But of course, a cool set of mechanics and an edgy attitude will only take you so far as a character. There's a little bit more to it than that. So let's you and me sit down for a bit and figure out Samira is an immigrant. Specifically, she's a refugee, and this is something in which she takes a rather refreshing amount of pride, actually. Born in Shurima, she and her family are essentially forced out of their homes by the conquests of a revived Seraph, and after the forced relocation, her family is too injured to continue their work as street performers, forcing Samira to become the primary caregiver of the whole unit. She herself becomes increasingly obsessed with conquering fear and seeking out thrills and danger wherever she finds them, partly driven by the memory of the fear that she felt when Seraph's goons came for her family. Eventually, unable to subsist on mere street performing, she is drawn to the Noxian legions. She serves with great skill in the Noxian warbands, but because she's a thrill seeker and she doesn't take orders from anyone, she's a little bit problematic for, unit discipline. Fortunately, Noxus, as it always does, has a place for the powerful, even those who can't follow orders. Captain Indari is a former saboteur who recruits Samira for her own private warband of elites that carry out missions that are otherwise too dangerous for standard military personnel. Samira probably only really hears the word danger and goes, "Yes, I'm in!" And because she's a champion, she quickly becomes one of the best personnel in the entire unit. Because of course. As things I want to do, though, when you're a member of a unit whose entire purpose is to do things that are extremely dangerous, eventually, something extremely dangerous goes wrong. A fortress of rebels that her warband is tasked with taking down explodes, disabling her captain permanently. Now, Samira dives into the flames to save her captain and loses her eye in the process. But frustrated with the failure of the mission, Indari disbands the unit. Samira, though, doesn't take very well to civilian life, as you may imagine if you're a crazed thrill seeker whose entire skill set revolves around killing people. And so she suggests to Indari a new partnership, one where Indari acts essentially as a broker for Samira's skills, and Samira takes on work as a high-stakes mercenary. And that is pretty much where we find her when she's introduced to League of Legends. A very skilled, extremely successful, very cocky, and very self-assured mercenary, doing all kinds of dirty work, primarily probably for the Noxian Empire, who seems to hold her in quite high regard, but also just, whoever can pay and offer an exciting mission. In fact, in Samira's short story, Daredevil Impulse, she's contracted to assault a Noxian compound where some kind of secret special weapon is being held. She doesn't know the nature of it, but she also doesn't care because, travel to exotic locations, kill people in foreign places, that's just Samira's kind of thing. The weapon, as it turns out, is already gone, and it's broadly speculated to be a teaser for an upcoming League of Legends champion, which Riot, please for the love of God, don't release that one for like a few months. Give me a moment, I beg you. Anyway, Samira returns to report that, hey, the weapon's already gone, not my problem, give me my money. And as Samira walks away with the payment, we're shown in a little bit of a side scene that the person who contracted Samira, and someone who indeed holds her in quite high regard, is LeBlanc of the Black Rose, who closes the story by instructing Captain Indari to give Samira whatever she wants because the Empire needs her. What exactly does that mean? Well, it's not clear, but obviously Samira is a key piece in some game that LeBlanc is playing with the politics of Noxus, but it also is a little bit instructive about what kind of character Samira ultimately is going to be in the lore of League of Legends, on the usual presumption that Riot, ever do anything else with her, or if they let her languish in lore hell for the next 2.5 years before they give her a minor rework and a new backstory, who knows? But Samira is a character who doesn't really have a specific driving quest for herself, the same way that, say, Yone does. Yone is all about figuring out the mystery of the Asakana and the demon that revived him, and what is his true nature now that he's been brought back from the dead, and yada yada yada. He has a personal journey of self-discovery through which, presumably, he'll interact with some of the stuff that happens in the League of Legends world, and he can have interactions with other champions, again on the assumption that Riot ever actually do any of that. But Samira, well, she pretty much already has everything she wants. She has a really dangerous job, she gets to show off a lot, she gets a lot of money, she gets to travel to fun places, she gets to kill people. That's pretty much fulfillment in Samira world. She's not especially driven by some kind of revenge quest against Serath, for example. Her family is safe, she has a nice job, her story is, in that sense, kind of complete. She doesn't have an obvious thing that she wants or that she's working towards. And this makes her a very flexible character, really, because anytime you need her to go anywhere and do anything, you can just justify it by saying, well, someone told her it would be dangerous and they gave her a lot of money. So, Samira in the Freljord? Sure, no problem. Noxus has plenty of interests up there. Samira in Piltover and Son? Well, she's already been there. She fist-fought a Chem Baron in Son once upon a time. Samira in Bilgewater? Man, she'd love that place. Samira on the Shadow Isles? Sure, why not? She's cocky enough to go. So the writers at Riot can really put her anywhere and put her up against anyone, because she would have a good reason to show up in anyone's story at any time, namely that someone paid her to do it. This is in contrast to someone like Zed or Shen, whose destinies are very much entwined with Ionia and that particular storyline. They can only really act within Ionia, and if you're going to take them out of Ionia, then you need a really exceptional set of circumstances to justify that travel. Like, for example, hunting down Jin, who happens to be hiding out in Zon. The downside of all that flexibility is that Samira herself doesn't really have a very compelling story arc hook. Not to say you can't tell interesting stories specifically about her, but the way that she's designed, she's probably going to work a lot better as a secondary actor in other people's stories rather than as the protagonist of her own. Because, again, she already has everything she wants, so unless you create a want for her, some kind of quest or storyline for her to pursue, there really isn't much for her to do except go on dangerous missions and kill people, I guess, which is what she's already been doing. Which is why I think that her color story ends with LeBlanc introducing some kind of mysterious scheme for which Samira is a necessary piece, but which is not driven by Samira's agency. Personally, I'd love to see Samira showing up in, say, the Shurima plotline, but that's on the very generous assumption that Riot is ever going to go back and actually continue the Shurima plotline. League of Legends, you've done it again, haven't you? We've talked on this channel many times before about how League of Legends tends to default to just putting sexy ladies in the video game without ever actually using their sexiness for any kind of character design purpose, and so, naturally, my opinion of Samira's character design is that she's pretty fucking awesome, actually. Samira is very much designed after the same power fantasy that goes into a game like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta. The fantasy at the core of her character isn't just being the biggest badass in the room, but also being the hottest piece of ass that anyone has ever laid eyes on while being the biggest badass in the room. Now, there is a healthy debate to be had, specifically about whether sexualization of female characters is justified when it is deployed with the justification of empowerment. And for my money, a big part of the difference is the question about whether being sexually attractive would reasonably be empowering for this particular character. So, returning to my favorite punching bag, Kai'Sa, for her, it doesn't really make a lot of sense why she runs around with massive cleavage, a skin-tight bodysuit, perfect makeup, and immaculately maintained hair, because her entire story is defined by a desperate struggle against overwhelming forces from another dimension that threaten to consume reality itself. And her lore makes it very explicitly clear that that's really the only thing she cares about, is attempting somehow to slow or prevent the literal end of the world. And so having Kai'Sa be very physically attractive is counter not only to the lifestyle that she lives, but to the personality that the story tells us that she has, one which is desperately obsessed with finding a way for reality not to end. Compare and contrast that with Samira, a cocky daredevil mercenary whose life's ambition is to be the coolest motherfucker in the room at all possible times, preferably while doing something stupid and dangerous. She's a natural performer and showman, someone who's very proud of the wealth that she has built for herself and interested in showing that off, someone who takes every fight with an opponent as an opportunity to put on a performance and outshine them, and someone who takes a particular pleasure in defying authority. And so for that character, you know what? Yeah, running around in flawless makeup all the time does seem like the kind of flex that she would do just so her tricks has a little bit more pizzazz when she pulls them off. Running around with her thighs and her midriff out, running around with bare arms to show off her cool badass tattoos, all of that feels very much like something that this character would do as part of expressing their core fantasy. And let's not forget that one of the primary things that authority has a tendency to tell women out here in, the real world is that they are not allowed to be vain, self-satisfied, confident, cocky, or proud of their own sexuality. And so, when you're creating a character who's selling the power fantasy of disregarding authority, having her be overtly sexualized and an overtly sexual character is one way to do that. There is a tendency, I think, when we talk about sexualization of female characters in video games, ignore the idea that women can find sexuality and sexualization empowering in the right context. And part of the reason why that idea is often ignored is because a lot of people use it in extremely bad faith to argue that you can never criticize any female video game characters for being over-sexualized, because what if there's a woman who finds that over-sexualization empowering? Wouldn't that make you the sexist if you criticize it and try to take it away? And I don't even want to entertain that nonsense right now. For my money, whatever my opinion is worth, I think Samira is an attempt to create a character who incorporates sexualization as an empowerment specifically in the context of her gender. Whether or not that attempt is successful is for, actual women to decide. But at least in my opinion, I think it's relatively successful. When I look at Samira, I don't read her as a sex object. I don't look at her sexualization as this weird, unnatural thing that's just tacked on for no reason, like with Caitlyn, Ashe, Syra, or Kai'Sa. Her sexuality seems to me to be a natural and justifiable part of her character design that springs naturally from the character that she's supposed to embody. Now, none of that means that if you're a woman and you don't find this kind of stuff empowering, you're some kind of gender traitor to feminism or whatever. We had similar discussions about Bayonetta back in 2011 and 2016 about whether a hypersexualized character like Bayonetta could ever be considered empowering or feminist. It's not a settled discussion, and I don't think it ever will be. It's a matter of constant interpretation and discourse. But if you're interested, I'll link a couple of pieces specifically about Bayonetta and her sexuality in the description down below that might be applicable when trying to evaluate Samira's character design as well. Anyway, with all of this defending of Samira's character design I've done, I would be remiss if I didn't also note that the whole idea of, this character's power fantasy involves being sexy for the purposes of empowerment is a sound concept, but in League of Legends, that concept has been kind of diluted by all the times in the past where Riot have tried to do the same thing. They have done this many times before, often on characters whose concept have a really hard time justifying the idea that being sexy is a necessary part of the power fantasy. And so, even though I think it actually works on Samira, it still fails to make her a unique character. Like, yes, being a sexy titty babe works for this particular character, but because they've put so many goddamn identical looking sexy titty babes in the video game already, Samira kind of has to be criticized by that same token. It's like, it's yet another sexy titty babe in a video game that has more than enough of them already. Riot, please stop doing this and start doing something else more interesting with the bodies of your female characters. Anyway, that was a long digression about only one small aspect of Samira's character design, so let's zoom out a little bit and look a little bit broader. Another aspect of Samira's character is that she is a Shuriman immigrant to Noxus. And that's very much part of both her voice lines and her story as well. She's someone who's very, very proud of her heritage, but who's also really happy about the nation she has adopted as her own. And this comes across actually quite well in her character design. The primary colors of Noxus, at least in modern times, are red and black. These are the defining colors of this particular region, and both of those are prominently incorporated in Samira's character design. She wears red and black clothes, she has black hair, she has a black eye patch, she's got this little red streamer coming off the back of her blade, whose handle is black. Her guns have black and red on them. But the primary color of Shurima as a region, like the primary identifying visual feature, is gold, and my word, doesn't she have a lot of gold accents all over her character design. Gold inlay and roses on her guns, golden ornaments in her hair, golden jewelry around her belly, gold leg strap, gold holster, gold bracelet, and even a little bit of gold on one of her ears. So Samira's color scheme is black and red accented with gold, literally the Noxian colors decorated with the Shuriman ones, which, as a way to show the character's belonging in two different cultures, is a pretty efficient way to do that. I also find that her tattoos have a really lovely decorative flair to them that reminds me of the kind of patterns that you'd see in Islamic or Persian artwork and calligraphy. Now, for all that I like many things about Samira's character design, though, I do have, as always, a couple of little nitpicks. The primary one being that she doesn't seem to have any battle damage at all. Well, okay, that's not true. She has an eye patch because she literally lost an eye diving into an exploding building. Fair enough, but the entire rest of her, like, the entire rest of her character has absolutely no battle scars. And this is something that kind of baffles me because, like, her whole character, the whole thing about her is centered around being a thrill seeker, someone who deliberately puts themselves into dangerous situations regardless of the danger to her own life, because she has the confidence that no matter what happens, she's competent enough to at least survive it. Like, the way that she got her eye patch was diving into a collapsing building, knowing full well that she would be injured in the process. So it seems to me like the most natural way to do some storytelling about the kind of life that she leads is to give her plenty of badass, cool battle scars that she can brag about over a drink in some seedy tavern immediately before starting a bar fight. And you could argue that, hey, wasn't part of her character fantasy is that she's the sexiest person in the room, to which I say fair enough, but on the other hand, have you considered that scars are hot as hell? Actually. So even from the perspective of, oh, we have to keep her sexy, I'd say, yeah, that's why you should put some scars on her. Give her a broken nose or some cool-ass burn marks somewhere on her body from where she survived diving into a lake of fire or something cool like that. Something that she can tell stories about. Having her be, like, just completely uninjured, and by the way, this is a problem I have with Sivir's character as well, just doesn't do a great job of telling the story of someone who makes their living as a mercenary, only taking on the most dangerous possible missions at all times. And yes, you can tell the story about someone being a badass by having them walk away from the most dangerous possible situations without a single scar or scratch on them, but if she never gets a scar or scratch on her, what that means is that she's never really in danger, because she always walks away scot-free. And specifically, Samira is a thrill seeker, which means she wants to be in danger. She wants to get into situations where she's going to get injured so that she can get up and walk away from them and be all the more badass for it. The character who walks away from every encounter without a scratch on them is not quite the same thing, I don't think. Here, let's look at some gosh darn diggity dang animation. I don't know why I said that in that voice. Anyway, we'll start with Samira's idle animation. And idle animations in video games are interesting beasts because a lot of the time, they're not something that is especially focused on when it comes to animation. Idle animations often are just like, oh, just to have the character breathe and move up and down a little bit so we can tell that they're alive. But there's not a lot of thought put into them, which is, like, justifiable. It's not the most impactful animation you could possibly spend time on. But I also find that sometimes idle animations can be really interesting in very small and often rather unnoticeable ways. Like, certainly, when you look at Samira's idle animation from the kind of perspective that you'd get if you actually played League of Legends, any detail that exists within it is pretty much lost, but when we zoom in, as we are able to do with this lovely little tool, courtesy of the good people over at timo.gg, we get a little bit. Like, I think there's a little bit of character storytelling going on in here, because, first of all, her posing. Like, you have this very confident, like, one hip shuffled way out, one leg forward, hand on the gun kind of pose that fits perfectly well with Samira's personality. But then there's her movement, and it's not a lot, but you can see that there's just this little swaying where, like, she pushes her hip out a little bit, the torso follows, and then once the torso's over, the hip comes back, and you have this slightly swaying feeling that's a little bit musical. Like, it's a little bit like she's bopping to some kind of gentle beat or something. This is this little bit of dance-like movement going on, but it's just a little bit too slow to be, like, identifiable as dance. Still, it's a lovely little this way that I feel like it sells the character's personality a little bit. Like, not a lot. It's a small thing, but it's a lovely little thing that I enjoyed. Anyway, let's, speaking of personality, here's one that has a little bit more of that. And again, if you look at Samira head-on when she's laughing, her laugh animation makes no sense whatsoever. But if you look at Samira from the perspective that you'd see her in League of Legends, the video game, which is like well from above, that's when the animation makes sense. Samira bends over backwards and laughs out loud and opens her mouth, like really quite a lot wider than perhaps you might say is necessary for a laugh, so that that laugh will read when you're looking at her in this particular size. And that's always the consideration with every animation that we look at for League of Legends champions. As I always mention, it's always worth considering, okay, maybe this looks a bit awkward from the angle that we're looking at it right now, but it almost always reads a lot more subtle and a lot better from the League of Legends gameplay perspective. Anyway, Samira is a brash, confident, outspoken, loud, dangerous woman, and for that reason, her laugh can't be a little tee-hee where she kind of holds a hand over her lips and just goes, hoo-hoo, that's funny. It really can't be that, can it? No, it has to be like, it has to be loud, it has to be full-throated, it has to involve pretty much her entire body going in to this laugh in order to really sell, like, the loudness of her personality. And I quite like the way that they're doing it, because she actually has a wind-up for the laugh. Like, she goes from her idle pose, which is this, and then she jumps into that, like, she drops down one knee as though she's getting ready for combat or something, and then she rears up, and you can see how, like, it's almost like her entire body, like her torso is getting pulled up. Like there's someone attached a string to the back of her and just yoink! Yanked her up into the air, because it's this laugh that's forcing its way out of her. Like, she's got this laugh down inside her that's just, like, punching her over backwards, lifting one leg up off the ground, and having her rear back and then eventually fall down with her whole body doing this la-loomf, this huge lurch, just because the laugh is so big and so loud that she has to get it out just right now. And I really like that. Like, she literally stomps her laughter, like, boom, like, just to punctuate the emotion of the whole thing. So like her personality, and there's some lovely little animation details going on. Look at Samira's hair. Let's see if we can zoom in on this a little bit. As she comes back down, like, this is a lovely little detail where, like, the braid, as she rears up, like, the braid gets laid over her arm here. And then as she comes down, look how the braid, like, whoops, it just follows, like, naturally. I think maybe they're using their physics tech in order to make that work properly. But I do like the little detail that the braid has its own weight and its own, like, movement. And as always, like, I do love me a good League of Legends silly face. When Samira hits S rank and everybody is low health. I quite like this laugh animation. I think it's very fun. And I really do think, like, this bit, where we get a lovely squash and stretch on her head. I really think this bit, like, where she's, like, practically getting punched or pulled into the air just by the sheer force of the laugh, that really gives it, like, a nice, like, really gives it that sense of she's bursting out laughing. It's forcing its way out of her. Moving on to some more personality, let's talk about Samira's Taunt, which has also got the distinction of being actually one of her offensive abilities. It only does 1 damage, it costs 1 gold to use, and it gives the enemy that's hit by it 1 gold if you actually manage to hit them. But it's also a part of her personality. Now, as we talked about in the lore section, Samira is a street performer from a family of street performers, and so that aspect of performance informs quite a lot of what Samira actually does as a character, because you can see that here in her taunt is that the thing she does is she basically puts on a performance. She flips a coin into the air, and I love this little move. Look how she rotates around this particular leg as she goes around. She kicks one leg out, woo, spins herself around and catches the coin while she's doing so, and then comes back around and does this, like, presenting move. Like, she just flipped a coin trick, basically. and then she flips the coin at the opponent. And as she spins around back to get ready for combat again, she does a little flourish with her gun, spinning it around, because she's always putting on a performance. She's always giving people a show, and that's just everywhere in her character. She loves to spin around. She loves to do little athletic tricks, and I do love the little drop of the hips, like when she's about to actually flip the coin. There, that little... She puts one leg forward, and then she drops her legs a little bit, almost as though she's taking aim, and then... Whoop, there it goes. And that aspect of performance, that aspect of putting on a show, which again is very Devil May Cry, like it's very straight out of your Bayonettas and Devil May Cries and Spectacle Fighters. It's just a really well-realized aspect in a lot of Samira's animations. A lot of her movements, especially when she like goes back from... Here's her critical hit with a gun, right? She does the critical hit, and then she does this little spin right here. She spins the gun, then she spins herself around, spins the other gun out of its holster, and then she gets back into that ready position. Those little spins and flourishes and twirls are all over her animation, and it's also something you can see when you look at her recall, where, again, she's 110% putting on a show. And you can literally see that in like, look at the way that she takes the clip out of the gun, right? Or out of the sword. She holds it up like that, like she does this little move, like flips it into the air, catches it in one hand, and then she presents it to the audience as though there's an audience of people gathered around her and goes, does everyone see the clip full of explosives? Yes? I dropped the clip on the ground, and then she kicks the sword out with her foot, and I love that little move. Like that when she needs to get the sword moved from here to up in the air, she kicks it with her foot, like just literally kicks it forward, stretches out her arm like that, gets the sword up, and then she explodes the clip and flies into the air with the explosion, and that's her recall. Which, yeah, that's about the most dangerous possible way that you could possibly recall, so that fits Samira really well. So the performance aspect is really good on her, and I really like that. But let's have a look at some of her attack animations. So, as always, when you want to look at the squash and stretch in League of Legends, the attack animations are the place to go. We're going to get some even better ones later, but even here on Samira's ordinary sword attack, we get some really good ones. Because she puts everything into this hit. And what I do like about it is that in order for her to attack with her sword, like, look at what she does. She literally leaps into the air. And this is just for her basic attack, right? Like, well, her basic attack when she's standing still anyway. Leaps into the air, and you get this little moment of floating where she's seemingly unaffected by gravity. And then her body comes down first and pulls the sword, like she pulls the sword with all of her body weight along with her into this wide arcing curve. And then you can see as like the sword stays in place as we get the hit. This is the hit part of the animation. As we get the hit, the sword stays in place and her body starts pulling at it almost as though it's like stuck in something. And then she dislodges it, and it follows her along with this, like, elastic effect. And then we return to an idle pose from there, which I think is lovely. She can also do it into a run, and here again, the little aspect of performance, where it's like she returns from the hit, and then she immediately dashes into a run. And look how she does that. If we take a look at here. She gets here, right? Like, the sword is all the way down here. She needs to get it up and over and back over on her back. So as she goes into the run, you can see, like, she leans backwards. She puts all of her weight into pulling the sword along again. Like, you can see she's practically, like, leaning on a 45-degree angle as she just leans her entire body weight into the run and lets the sword act as a counterweight. And then as she brings the sword up over her head, that's when the foot comes down, catches her weight, boom, she's in position to keep running. And it's just a really well-animated little twirl. And again, she does the little twirl over her head because she's a showman always. And speaking of being a showman, there is a lovely detail that I hadn't noticed initially about her Q, which is when she swings at her sword in her Q, what she actually does is she lets go of the handle of the sword, and then she grasps the little streamer or bandana or whatever the hell little thing that's coming off the end of it, and then she swings it with that, and then again does the little twirl to get it back in hand, which I just thought was a really cool little detail, that to get extra range on the sword, she swings it by that thing. It reminds me of something Ichigo does in Bleach at one point, where he uses a similar little streamer coming off a very similar looking sword, actually, to do exactly the same thing, which I thought was quite clever. Anyway, let's look at some really good squash and stretch. You can tell already, right? Like, even just from the animation in motion, that there's gonna be some fun stuff going on here. Well, take a look at this. That's a long Samira. Oh, that's really good. I really like that. So this is this is Samira's critical animation. This is her critical, and that means like we're doing the same. We're doing the same thing that we did with her ordinary sword attack, right? Like, she's jumping into the air, and then she's letting her body weight pull the sword down, but because it's the critical, it needs to hit much harder, so she's jumping really far into the air right now, and her body stretches even longer, like, just as long as it can possibly go, and we get, like, her entire body essentially describes the curve that she wants the sword to follow as she comes down. And then she swings the damn thing. Smack right down. And again, as we mentioned earlier, this looks ridiculous from this particular angle. But if we zoom out a bit and put it into a League of Legends perspective, all of a sudden you can see, like, the necessity of all that squash and stretch. The necessity of exaggerating the animation so much, because the player needs to look at this animation and understand, oh, that was a critical hit. They need to be able to tell that just by looking at it, that that's the thing that happened, and that's why they have these critical hit animations. It's part of the gameplay communication, that if you get critical by Samira's sword, you'll know that it was a crit that hit you, not just from the amount of damage that was done, but just by reading the game visually. Which I think is quite well achieved here, really, even if... Spider arms, spider arms. Boom, even if it looks very silly when you take it in freeze frame. But like I said, it is just the same movement as the basic sword attack, but stretched out to an even longer extreme. And that stretching is what gives it the tension. Like, you have... Notice how the sword, like, it's up here, and it's gonna stay there. It's not gonna move anywhere for a while. It just stays and stays and stays until finally there's so much tension, so much stretching, so much pull from the elastic band that is Samira's body that it gets forced out of position and slams down to deliver the damage to the enemy. Which is a very efficient way of communicating, like, the power of a hit is just to... This is something that, if you watch One Piece, they essentially do that by having, like, the more powerful Luffy's punch is gonna be, the more he winds up. That's essentially the same kind of principle that's going on here. Now, finally, for her animation, I did want to have a look at her ultimate, because it's got a few interesting things going on. Unfortunately, in the model viewer that we're using, Timo.gg, we can't see the visual effects that are happening on the champion as they do their thing, and that's okay, but specifically with Samira's ultimate, we kinda do need to see what's going on with the visual effects, which is why I loaded into the practice tool earlier today and actually had to play League of Legends for a while. Ugh, an unpleasant experience all around, but I do it for you. I sacrifice for you, people. And got Samira to the requisite S rank so that we can take a look at what her ultimate actually looks like. As Samira jumps into her ultimate, the animation she's actually doing is relatively simple. She's just spinning around, firing her gun in different directions. But what makes the ultimate work, what makes you really get the sense of her being this whirling dervish of just death and destruction, spinning out in every single possible direction from her, are the visual effects that are being applied as she does so. Because as Samira is spinning around, she generates this half a dozen after images that follow her along, and sort of give the impression that she has essentially more arms than she really does. You can really see that here, that there's this after image with the guns out that has a contrasting position with her actual body and where the guns are on that one. And that's what allows the ult to really sell this vision of someone who's spinning around so fast that it's basically impossible to see them. But if you actually look at Samira herself, like her actual character model, what it's doing it's really not doing that much. She's just spinning around at a perfectly ordinary pace and firing her guns every once in a while. In fact, she even stops, like, in each pose. Like, she takes a key pose, like there. She just stops for a little bit. And then she gets to that pose right there. And holds that just for a second. And then she moves on to a different pose. Holds that just for a second, moves on to a different pose. Holds that just for a second. And then eventually her ult ends. And the thing that gives the impression of just that immense speed and power of her rotations is the visual effects and the after images. And that's something that also comes across when you look at her, like, general attack animation, is that a lot of that is also sold. And that's also something that comes across on her regular sword strikes. Like, we looked at them close up in the model viewer, which is not always 110% accurate, and they looked a little bit awkward to us. And even when I zoomed out, sometimes you could kind of see some slightly awkward things happening in the animation if you were paying close attention. Well, in the game itself, there's a bunch of VFX layered over top of that, which helps cover up the little sins. And they're not mistakes, they're little sins and contrivances that animators use in order to make a movement read really well, even if it's not, like, strictly anatomically possible or whatever. You do these little smears and these little fudges in order to make the movement and the animation feel good when you're looking at it, and feel good to activate also with your own key presses, which is a key part of animation, is not always doing everything perfectly, but also knowing the right way to cover up all the little mistakes and cover up all the little oddities that you don't necessarily want the players or the viewers to focus on, but that are necessary just in order to sell the vision and the movement that you've got going on for the character. And Samira, in general, has really good animation that manages to do that. Samira is a kind of character design that Riot have tried many times before to execute on with what I would like to call extremely limited success. But finally, they have a bona fide success on their hands, which I really do wish that that success wasn't a bit dulled by all the less successful experiments still running around in the game. And while I think the nature of her lore risks her becoming kind of a one-note, slightly shallow character unless Riot does a lot of work to deepen her with more stories, I also kind of think that that's okay. Just to have a simple, fun, well-executed version of this character who can run around in League of Legends and be cocky and confident and do Devil May Cry references and kill people with swords and stuff. It's a kind of character for which I think there's always room for at least a few. Running around, just complicating things, getting in the way and being cocky mercenaries on the wrong side at the wrong time in the most entertaining way possible. And I really hope that Riot do actually remember to use her as such. They now have the perfect mid-boss for literally any story they want. Samira shows up, causes trouble for the heroes, and then dashes off in a stylish way. And you never need to explain her motivations or how she got there with anything more complicated than money. Some characters in League of Legends don't see a lot of use in the lore, because in order to progress their lore at all, a whole bunch of complicated stuff has to happen in order for their story to move forward. Like, the Shurima storyline is inevitably going to involve some kind of confrontation between Renekton, Nasus, Serath, and Azir, even if it's only trying to tell a story about Talia, because she and Sivir are all bound up in that thing inextricably. But Samira is free to come and go as she pleases in pretty much any story that Riot wants her to, so I'm just hoping that they actually want her to, and that they're gonna do it. And also, I hope that they give her some battle scars. I mean, it's the most obvious thing in the world, Riot. Come on, even the other guys in her splash art have scars all over them because they're mercenaries, and you would expect people who do dangerous mercenary work, like, to have a few of those. I mean, come on! Hey, thank you very much for watching another episode of What's the Deal With. I am almost caught up on all of the new goddamn champions that Riot just decided to throw in a pile these past 6 months, and now I just need to deal with Seraphine, and oh boy, that sure is gonna be a thing, and then maybe, finally, I can go back to doing some videos about some of the old champions at some point also, because I've got a bunch of them that I kind of want to get to. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video and you would like to see more videos like it, then they exist on my channel, and you can also hit the subscribe icon, and then the bell icon, and then the like icon, and then, you know, just click on a bunch of buttons, because that's good for the algorithm, which makes numbers go up something. I get ad revenue, and then I can pay my rent. And speaking of paying my rent, I also have a Patreon, I have a merchandise store, I have a tip jar. If you want to use any of those, then I'd be very grateful for the help, but if you don't want to, or you're not in a position to be able to, please don't worry about it. And this month, it's been a little overwhelming, actually, but I would like to welcome Syandra, Kendrick Herring, Semeti Sequia, Manigro, Benjamin Girard, Dead Toaster, Acantor 980, Sebris, Erica Dino, Flora Logny, Hannah Tian, John Sun, Scarfed Aselv, Fe, Isaac Chavez, Generation Wars, James Carr, Shamwa Falconer, Realm, Jana, Lady Faceless, Richard Holler, Mitchell Ansay, Hell's Fate 6, Justin Wang, Nico Christiansen, Alexander Shepard, Sean Bond, Juan Banuelos, Julio Gaetano Rivera, Stanimira Stancheva, Moon Sovereign, Libellin Panda, Matt, and Justin Mahubian Jones to the Patreon. Thank you all very much for joining. I'm able to do this thing for a modest little living because of you guys. At the end of my videos, I try to encourage people to, generally speaking, support online content directly with direct contributions of however much you can, whenever you can, even if it's just $1 or $2, because those $1 or $2, especially for a YouTuber who's niche or who has a small audience, can actually be the same as literally thousands of views on a video. So even if it doesn't feel like very much, it actually makes much more of a difference than you might think. So whether it's me or someone else, if there is online content that you enjoy, consider supporting it directly with anything you can, whenever you can. Anyway, last bit of self-promotion and then we're done, I swear. I have a second channel. I play video games over there. Currently, I'm playing through Hades, that Greek mythology roguelike where everyone's either really sexy or really tragic or really cute, and I want everybody to be my friends, and it's very distressing, frankly. Outside of that, I'm also finishing up Final Fantasy X over there in a little bit, so if you want my commentary on that particular game, hey, it's available, and I play Legends of Runeterra sometimes. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please remember to wash your hands and wear a mask around other people, and try as much as you can to act in solidarity with those who are trying to make the world a better place right now. Oh, and if you're American, go vote if you can, safely, please. Like, I know, but it helps a little bit, at least.